Welcome to this episode of Therapist Sanctuary. My name is Jen Westcott, and I'm the host. And this is a place where we really just nerd out about, well, today, with the who I have here today, we're probably going to talk about addiction, recovery. We talk about therapy, healing, what helps, what doesn't help, all of that. And so, welcome to my guest, Palmer Stroud.
Right on. Glad to be here. Good to see you, Jen.
Now I'm like, did I say your last name right?
You totally did. 100%.
Okay, because we know each other in a way, let's just say that we usually only know each other's first names.
Yeah, exactly right.
Welcome, Palmer. I'm excited to talk to you.
I'm really looking forward to it. I have no idea what we're going to talk about yet, but I
Me
I have
neither.
I have some ideas of what we're going to talk about, which is exciting. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, I don't know what we're going to talk about either, except I like to know why people become counselors and therapists. Like that's one thing I do know I want to get into is what made you decide to go down this road of becoming a therapist? Is that what you call yourself? What do you refer to yourself as?
Whatever people would like to refer to me, depending on what they think that definition means at the time, which it's all kind of
Okay.
overlapping, I think. I
Yeah.
call myself a counselor.
Yeah.
Um, you know, what I do is definitely more rooted in psychology. That's sort of where my discipline comes from is psychology.
Hmm.
But yeah, I call myself a counselor. Um,
Okay, we'll go with that.
yeah,
Let's do that.
yeah,
Where should we start? Why don't we start with talking about how we met?
totally. In Cranbrook. That's actually
Yeah.
crazy to think. So, I was actually brought out to BC. I grew up in Edmonton area, Spruce Grove.
Okay.
And I was out in BC because I was going to rehab uh 12 years ago now.
Oh my God, 12 years ago.
Something like that, 2013, spring of 2013. So yeah, exactly about 12 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, I was brought to BC to try and find out why, my life was heading down such a spiritual, nihilistic path.
Did you
Um,
figure it out?
I'm still trying to.
Me
Um,
too.
uh, I'm definitely, yeah, I think there's a lot of messages I wish I could give that kid now, but that
Mm,
is it's a cool place to start because so many beautiful people that I met out in that area in my early 20s, and I look at the love and tolerance that I got from people like you along that, and just people
mm.
who are like, oh, you're just there, right? And it's interesting to look back on that and especially in particular meeting people who are counselors and on the path to being um, to
Sober.
healing themselves and being sober.
Hmm.
Um, and when I would say, hey, I think I want to be a counselor, people, and I remember you being one of those people who was like, yeah, you should. Like, that's awesome. That's a good goal to have, and um,
Hmm.
yeah, so I guess that kind of was like the beginning of the journey for me would have been around the time when I would have met you.
Yeah,
And I
in
was,
the rooms
yep,
of support groups.
yeah,
One of my first memories of you was we have our support group hosts a camp out every year, and
right.
we were at it, and you got up on the stage and started singing, and I was like blown away, like, oh my God, that guy can sing.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were a musician at that point, and it was really amazing listening to you.
Yeah, that was one of the things for sure that still remains part of my spiritual compass is to know how I'm doing is if I'm playing music. Um Back then I used to joke about that, but music definitely saved me from I don't know if I would have made it through without music. To be honest with you, it was just a huge part of my healing and yeah, I remember that camp out too.
I
Those
remember we were in this shitty campground, and it was so hot, and there was
yeah.
so many, this is what I remember the most, like, There was this whole I don't know why I'm saying this, but I can't help it. It just is what's coming to my mind. There was this big, huge tub of Caesar salad on the buffet line, and there was so many flies, and it was so hot. It was and you know what? We all ate it, and we thought it was great.
Totally, and kids running around. I
Oh,
was it.
yeah.
Those campouts are always a fun time. With a
And,
bunch.
who can forget? I think we're the only I bet we're the only camp out that plays chicken shit bingo.
Oh yeah, running around, kids chasing chickens, and oh
Yeah.
man, yeah,
Did they have chicken shit bingo that year?
they
Like, where
totally did. I remember seeing it and thinking, this is some like real hillbilly stuff going on.
I thought it was a joke, and then they actually had chickens, and we put them in this pan, and wherever and then we put a bingo card under them, and wherever they shit, that's the number that gets popped.
Oh,
It
yeah,
was
that's how it went. Yeah,
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 it's
totally.
a little crazy.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Those are good
Yeah,
times.
they
So when
were.
you say I mean, I guess the part of that is a good place to start. When you say helped you get through it all, what is it all that you had to
So
get through?
totally. I mean, like I was young when I started to struggle. Like I started struggling with you know, drugs and alcohol by the time I was about 13. I dropped out of school by the time I was in grade 9. So by the time I met you, I was about 22, and I hadn't grown up at all. I had no real direction. I'd worked and partied really hard, and that was sort of my life. But there was just this longing for way more out of my life. Like I'd sold myself short. Um, and it
Mm,
just felt like the problems had piled on. Um, and uh, so I guess like with the music piece was always just a gauge of how I was doing. So in my songs that write, I always can find whatever hidden message I'm supposed to be listening to. And there was a lot of
mm.
darkness in my music at that time, a lot of pain, and I still have those songs. Let's Sit There and What Let I wrote when I was about 14, 15, which tell me exactly how I felt back then. Um, so I guess it was kind of like the crisis of faith or coming of age of being like, hey,
Mm,
I'm trying to connect with something bigger than me. I'm not finding it through drugs and alcohol anymore. And I need
mhm.
to I need to try and find a way out. So I kind of end up at this rehab center, and then end up living in BC and meeting all these amazing people. And
So
slowly, go ahead.
take
Yeah.
me back to, like, what was your childhood like? Tell me about
So
your family.
my family's pretty awesome. And also a lot of chaos and pain and hurt there too. I was super lucky. So I grew up in I guess like a medically minded home. My mom's a nurse, dad's a doctor. My dad quit drinking prior to me being born.
Mm,
Um, sort of always around different people that were sober, and my dad was helping people uh, with sobriety. I didn't know exactly what that looked like, so I grew up kind of
mm,
enmeshed in that world. Um, my childhood had a lot of good in it, but divorce was part of my parents' story.
mm.
And that
How
was
old were
around,
you?
I think somewhere between 13 to 15, somewhere around there. I think the disconnect was sort of always there with them, but ultimately, um, I checked out around, geez, I want to say like 12, 13. I was a really good soccer player, had a lot of potential, was playing pretty
Mm,
serious soccer, tons of potential. And when I started, I can kind of pinpoint it. When I started smoking weed, that all was sort of like ambition gone, motivation gone. Um,
uh,
and I think, like I say, I really fundamentally believe that what I was trying to do was connect spiritually through weed and through friends and everything like that.
like
You
you
know,
needed something bigger than what you had in your
to-
day-to-day living.
totally. And like, you know, it's interesting talking about this from the perspective I have now, because I'm not sitting there being like, oh, it's mom's fault or it's dad's fault or it's this or it's like, no, like they were really solid, and I have a really good relationship with everybody in my family right now, including my three older siblings. So I was kind of the youngest too. And
Mm,
like all I remember is being like having three older siblings that wanted the best for me, thought like, you're awesome, you're good at music, you're good at sports, like you're
Wow.
amazing. Lots of love, lots of encouragement. Um, and I think I held myself to a really, really high, unachievable standard. And I would try to be the best at something. And once I could see that maybe I could, screw it, I'm done. No follow through, no,
Mm.
yeah. And a lot of I have a high standard for myself. It's still something that is real in my life today. That voice inside my head that constantly says I'm not doing enough, I'm not achieving enough, I'm not busy enough.
Oh, no. I feel
I
that even in this second, I'm like, I should have the right questions. I should be asking something. Is it going okay? Is it like it's
no, right?
constant.
It is. Well, and you know what? A mutual friend of ours, and I think you'll know who I'm talking about when I talk about this, but I won't mention his name. Um, taught me this thing. There's that voice. Thanks for sharing. I'm gonna carry on living my life. And that voice, that inner critic, inner judge
Oh,
stuff,
yes.
deep work. Let's been there forever. Um, and the worst part about this shitty roommate, which talks in my exact tone of voice with my vocabulary, knows me better than anyone else, can cut me down
Oh,
worse than anybody. And and he does not like to be ignored. That doesn't help. I thought I could
right.
just ignore that guy and be like, no. But I got to be like, all right, thanks for sharing. You're trying to teach me something, and I don't know what it is,
Oh,
but it's not helpful right now.
oh my
Um,
God. And it talks with complete authority.
the
Like,
judge, man.
you are not doing it right. And if you were, well, first of all, there's nothing you can do that would ever be doing it right enough for the judge.
No, no, because it is
And
the
if you were
ultimate
doing it
judge.
right, you should take a step back and, you're getting a little too big for yourself. And like, there is no
Oh yeah.
winning. There's no winning.
Yeah, black and white. Well, and that's, I was joking with you earlier about the Millennium Falcon, which you can't really see in the corner there, but I always bring it back to a lot of Star Wars references lately because my daughter's 8 and she's getting into Star Wars, and I always think of that like there's the dark side and there's the Jedi
Mhm.
side, and that absolute thinking, man, of like black and white, and
Right.
that's the judge. And um yeah, so that voice is in my head, and I think I have a pretty good relationship with that voice right now in my life, um, which is
That's awesome.
baffling. Which is
Uh,
baffling.
Could you have ever imagined? Like, I had a client just yesterday, and she said to me that she decided she's kind of new to doing judge work. She said, "Oh my God, Jen, last weekend I decided to have a judge-free weekend."
Right? Like hang out, whatever
I'm
that
like,
thing is.
let's have a judge-free conversation, Palmer.
Let's
Like,
do it. I'm
okay,
down.
so here's what I want to know. Like, you said something about you had this, like, your family is pretty great. Did you have trauma? Like,
um,
I've always
oh
had this
yeah.
belief, like, people who go down the road of really, like, addiction, there's got to be something dark. Me right up if you say everything was great about your
No,
childhood.
no. So yeah, and I mean I'm familiar with like Gabor Mate's perspective on that, obviously with trauma being, but I think it can be a bit of a problematic
Lens.
prognosis because
Yeah.
it's like, okay, everybody has trauma, not everybody has addiction. So the manifestation of maybe mental health and physical disease is some sort of inability to process trauma, or the way that we perceived it at the time or processed it later or carried on and spoke about it. The narrative we had around the trauma is more important than did you have trauma. So I had trauma for sure. I could have had, I mean, it's interesting because I've been talking a lot about this lately, Jen, and this is so this might get a little deep, this
Let's
thought,
do it.
but and Gabor Mate talks a little bit about this, is you come into the world crying and screaming, traumatized by the fact that you have to exist. Life's traumatizing, life hurts. Um, our reality and the perception in which we view that reality is so complex that of course we're traumatized just by existing.
Mhm.
So as far as like a piece of trauma in my life, I have a list of them. I've made a pretty good organized list of where these traumas have manifested in my life, and the ones that have a bit more power over me than others. But uh, those were kind of processed in my first when I first cleaned up.
Can you tell me some of them that are on the
Um,
list?
so like some some stuff with like so with within my family there was just some pain and hurt during my parents' divorce for sure.
Mhm.
Um, just chaos. And
Give me a story. Tell me a
so
story.
so one of the big ones for me that I always come back to is just when I was young, a friend of mine had passed away. I think it was in about grade six. A friend of mine, his uncle had passed away, and I was really nervous to tell him about it. I was like, shit, like I want to talk to him and tell him, like, man, like I'm so sorry you lost your uncle. I knew his uncle as well, and it
Mm,
was kind of that first experience with that. And I didn't know how to tell him, and I remember getting in trouble for not calling him and telling him, which like I see now as being like maybe a bit more exertion of authority than I would have liked. But the moral behind it was correct. Like, hey, your buddies, you need to go through the fear and console your buddy and be there for him.
mhm,
Should. But um, yeah, so there was like a bit of discipline in my home, but my dad or my mom, like my mom was more on the end of like grab the plastic ladle and give me a beat down when I was a kid, but not real
mhm.
bad or anything.
Yeah.
My dad, no, never physical in that way, but some bullying in the house. Like I was the youngest, so when my brothers and my dad and us were all together, I was the young guy, and some stuff what they perceived as funny and picking on me, I
Wasn't.
know, like it was like
Mhm.
restrained, like I just, but nothing that I look at now and say like, oh, this was so malicious and
Right.
traumatizing. Um, so I
But,
feel pretty lucky in that way.
it brings this up for me that if you only look at if I only look at addiction as the result of trauma, then it negates anyone's story that hasn't had that big trauma. And there are people who struggle with addiction who
Got
either
nothing.
don't have it or are out of touch with it or what. But like maybe that's a bit narrow too. You know what I mean?
I think so too. It is super.
We don't know all the reasons people get addicted.
It's super narrow. I think that some of the current work that I agree with more than anything in the addiction realm right now would be like Ann Lemke, Dopamine Nation, and
Ah,
just some of the more. I mean, it had. Here's the truth: is that it we knew almost 100 years ago that the only way to treat alcoholism was through spiritual or religious conversion. That was,
mhm,
they figured that out. They had a lot
right,
of evidence to back that. You can go down a rabbit hole of literature in the early 1900s, and that's all the literature pointed is, Carl Jung, many other really reputable behaviorist psychologists, hardcore evidence based, like
right.
not woo woo scientists
Yeah,
figured out like we don't know what's going on here, but you need some sort of religious conversion, spiritual experience, psychic change in order to get away from an addiction.
right.
So I think that really takes what we're talking about now and it says, like, okay, trauma is one thing, one
Yeah.
component of a spiritual problem, which a spiritual problem is a detachment to me. And I guess this would be my own definition. So you could maybe kind of riff up against it but it's like it's a detachment from meaning. Um,
Mm,
and I heard you talking actually one of your clips from your previous podcast about that God-sized hole. Well, a
mhm,
spiritual sized hole that we're trying to fill. So
right,
Anne Lamke, what I love about her work is I believe she's a psychiatrist by trade, by profession, but she's worked with addicts and people with substance use disorder for a really long time, including process addictions. So she's a big advocate for support groups as well as like kind of saying like why does this work or what's going on here, and she describes like this world today where we live in such abundance that like
mhm,
we have no, like what happens to a cactus if it gets put in a tropical rainforest, and that's sort of
right.
what it feels like what's happening
I'm
to us
like,
here.
tell
It
me the
gets
answer.
super saturated. It's not meant to
Oh,
live there, right? So um yeah, I think we're in a situation where addiction is a very natural reaction to an endless stream of hedonic pleasure. And
Wow. And I guess the ultimate where this leads me in my mind is, does it matter
it
why?
doesn't. No,
Right?
and
Like, I
doesn't.
mean, if what we care about is people getting whole, and if they don't wanna stay in addiction, that they have a way out, then that's the focus, right? Like, how do we help people get out? And, okay, I gotta ask you this. Here's my burning question. I have noticed over the years being a therapist and being someone in recovery and in support groups that my own profession doesn't really believe in support groups as much as I thought they would. Why the
um,
fuck is that? And it
um,
actually really bugs me because often it's people who've never been, who are therapists, who don't think it's like, maybe they think it's kind of passé, or that the 12-step
yeah,
world is not really with the
yeah.
times, and they have a lot of opinions about it, but they've never been, they've never seen the magic of it.
It's really awesome
Have you
seeing the
found
ones.
that?
Oh, I mean, the yeah,
And it's like harm
it's
reduction all the way, which I get the place for that because I needed that before I was ready,
for
and
sure.
it but I think we need the whole spectrum. I don't know, like, I think it should be a big choice, not
Well, picture this. So, picture this. So if you know, if I'm going to school and I'm very interested in counseling, therapy, psychology, social work, whatever you want to call it,
Mhm.
those are the realms of people who are getting into the profession of the so-called therapist or so-called counselor, which, like I say, I'm big on definitions and I'm not certain what those words mean anymore. Um, yeah, I'm not certain what they mean. Um, I'm not certain what a lot of definitions mean in the world today, right? It's hard, but
Yeah.
what I take it as is that it kind of, if if you go to school for this thing and you want to try and help people, and lots of them are super genuine and they're compassionate and they
Yeah.
want to help people, they really do. It doesn't really fit well with your model if some person who's never gone to school, who's 20 years sober and like works as a
Yeah.
carpenter and doesn't know how their brain works, like
Can help your client that you can't seem to help.
totally, especially when it comes to addiction. There's some
I know.
practical things that we can apply to phobias, anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
sleep, autism, ADHD. Cool, right on. This is scientific stuff, but addiction's a spiritual problem. So
Right.
somebody who's, say someone grew up Catholic, they went away from the Catholic Church, and then they ended up back at the Catholic Church and they had a spiritual problem of addiction. There's people who've cleaned up that way, a ton,
Yeah.
like millions.
Right.
And I'm talking all sorts of different addictions: food, sex, gambling, money, drugs, booze, you name it.
Yeah.
Um, so that's okay. I think that it's sort of a difficult realm. That's sort of, addiction is a difficult realm because anybody who tries to, like, I would love to have a conversation with somebody who says support groups don't work, or like there's no pill you can take. Like there's still nothing. The only interventions that have shown any promise, which I've been really interested in lately, is some of the psychedelic treatment,
Yeah.
which has shown promise, and like it's not really popular in Canada or the United States right now, but there's clinics in Mexico where they do ibogaine treatment, which, you know, um, it's one of
Mhm.
those things I can even send you links to these papers because they're like, you just can't argue them. Like I'm
I
skeptical of
know.
that kind of stuff, but when I look at the data, it's like, okay, like, you know, really, really severe PTSD, really, really severe addiction, ibogaine treatment, decreased depression, decreased like all this stuff where you're like, whoa, this is really
Right.
crazy. Um, so, but it brings me back. So that's just more evidence that it's a spiritual illness, because one of the things they know about psychedelics is that they sometimes will give people an encounter with something spiritual. And maybe that encounter with something spiritual can
Mhm.
open someone's mind a little bit to a spiritual solution. Um, and I think in the 30s when they were doing research on alcoholism. I think they're still right. They need a psychic change. We don't know how to induce that. But in extreme cases, it might be beneficial for people as a last resort to go and try some of these methods in a safe, environment.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's a tough one because a lot of I remember taking a class on compulsive sexual behavior disorder was what that's their buzzword for
Right.
people who got
If we
issues.
make it sound fancy,
Oh, it's
it
fancy.
it feels better to study than just I
Totally.
cannot stop whacking off.
Exactly, right?
What do we
Like,
do about
what do you
that?
do? I don't know. You should, I don't know, shame yourself because you're going to hell. I don't know. No, I
Mhm.
don't think so. But yeah, so I mean, this class, the teacher was very clear, and I'm not. She has her lens that she looks at the world, but she was the cause of it was the patriarchy. That was what caused it, according to their view. And I was like, okay, I'm going to push up against that because I think it's more complicated. And it was only men in a position of power who had this disorder. It was like really horrible.
Oh my
And
goodness.
then it was, what was the other thing? What they were trying
There
to
are
pin
females that have
a
sex
ton,
addiction.
yeah, a ton. Pornhub is a very go look down the rabbit hole on their success, and you'll know that it's men and women who are really not doing well because of porn addiction. And
Right.
it's not good.
Yeah.
And our youth are who we got to worry about because I think we're coming into a real big problem with social media and pornography addiction is a big area of my own focus with the people I work with, and it's not looking good. It's
Wow.
bad. Um, but yeah, so I think like the lens that the professionals are looking at it through right now, I'm not on board with a lot of it, but at the same time, I'm willing to toe the line with them and try and understand where they're approaching these problems from. But I really do think that it's yeah, the universities have become a little bit detached from the healing part, so they're used to
Right.
teaching and being like, I'm going to work on you. So like when I do counseling with people, and I know you're the same way, I'm not working on you. I'm working with you.
Right.
I'm working
Yeah.
with you. I
Yeah.
don't work on you, and I'm never going to offer a suggestion to do something that I wouldn't be willing to do myself or haven't tried
Well,
myself.
it's that like academia is kind of similar to the medical model in that it's a very expert model. It comes from this place of one of the people in this relationship has the answers and the other one
Right.
has the problem. And so the person with the answers can't also have problems, so they have to hide that and be the one that is there to impart the wisdom and teach it becomes this very cerebral teaching kind of heady skill based just do these things and you'll be okay, which anyone who's had an addiction like you and I,
Yeah.
we could bust through that in about 5 seconds.
I
Like, I did it. I went
yeah.
to lots of therapists who were not addicts and really conned them into just I used to talk about this in the
Condom.
rooms. I conned them. It was so weird. I went quite a few times to addiction-based services to tell them that I thought I had an addiction and could they help me. But the way that I phrased it all was then I lied about how much I drank and I underplayed it and I until they said to me, I don't think you really have a problem.
Oh yeah, I've heard
And then
that
I
story.
and then I would leave and go, well, I don't have a problem, so I can keep going until it got too much for me and I couldn't function anymore. And then I had to get really real. And then I went to someone who was in recovery and I just knew the gig was up on trying that bullshit.
Yeah.
Because I
Wow.
said to that person who we both know, I think I have a problem. And he said, well, it's only a problem if it's a problem, which fucked with me. Then I said, well, but I don't want to drink and I try not to. And he's like, well, if you want to drink, you should. Like, and I remember he actually got up in the middle of one session and said, I'm going to go get the Canada Food Guide and see how much you're allowed to drink safely. I'll be right back. And I was left in his room thinking, what the hell is going on? He's supposed to be saying to me, well, how many do you drink? And
Yeah, yeah,
all
yeah.
this harm reduction stuff. He didn't do any of that. So by the time I'd had a few sessions with this guy, I was left with myself.
Nice. Yeah, that was fun.
Exactly.
That was fun, eh?
That was he did it, and then once I got into the support world and support groups, I knew that what he had done was exactly what that world tells you to do. Like, we're adults, we can drink if we want. I never try to stop anybody from but anyway, that's getting away from what you said, but I totally agree, like, when when you have to be the expert, that's a lot of pressure
Oh my goodness. Well, like an expert in okay,
in the
so
human condition.
oh my God,
Like
I know. Well, the ego that's attached to that, Jen. Like, I mean, and from a professional and academic standpoint, the ego that is attached to like I'm sorry, and I'm gonna say this to you right now. Nothing gets like I'm a specialist in 100 different illnesses. It's like, no, you're not. So if you could be a
right,
specialist in addiction and a couple other things and right on, but like it's very
it's a bit of a
egotistical.
stretch.
Like your brain and your central nervous system and your circulatory system, your body, this beautiful vessel that you've been giving is the most complex mass of cells you could ever imagine.
Mhm,
Your brain itself is got as many synapses as the known universe. Like it's complicated. So to try and pretend like I know everything that's going on with the complex,
mhm.
what we do get to know is simple solutions seem to work best.
Mm, that's
And
music to my ears because it feels good when it gets simple, doesn't it?
well, I think it has to
Doable.
be. It has to be. I think like the solutions that we give people, that's one of the things I love about psychologists is, and there's lots of things I don't like about psychologists, lots of things I love about them, but the discipline alone is um, really grounded in the fact that like if somebody doesn't follow through on the instructions that I gave them as a remedy for their problem, then I haven't given simple enough suggestions. And that's where the behavioral piece comes from in cognitive behavioral therapy is the behaviorists figured that out a long time ago, learning in behavior that you need small implemental goals to try and teach people to do things. I mean, they applied
Mm,
that to the worst things back then. It's a dark world. The behaviorists, informed the way that
mhm,
we treated our military and we
mhm.
we yeah, behavior modification kind of stuff, right? Which
Yeah.
is you know,
Trickery. There was a lot of trickery
trickery back then
and
for
a
sure.
lot of, like, big stick stuff.
Totally in lab coats and odd, right?
Mhm,
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess it's interesting like talking about this too, because one of the things I know, and I guess, and I know you would know this too, is like right now I'm relatively early on in my career. Like I've been helping people with pretty serious mental health disorders since 2013. In a sense, I've walked directly with these people. I've had my own mental health struggles myself and my family. Um, so I'm comfortable in it. And I think
mhm,
when you ask me, like, why did you become a counselor? It's because I'm absolutely fascinated by people who have destroyed their lives and get told by professionals that they're going to be medicated and on social assistance the rest of their life and watching them build companies, watching them get off the streets,
mhm.
I love it. It's my favorite thing in the whole world.
Was did anybody ever say that to you?
Probably just myself. I think a lot of people really did believe in me, but like I said, I'm a grade 9 dropout who cleaned up, got a bachelor of science at a
Mhm,
reputable university, um, addictions counseling certification.
mhm,
So you can, and I mean, I was messed up, and I'm still messed up. I still got dark thoughts. I still got pain and struggle that I go through. I got spiritual issues, family issues, all that stuff.
mm.
Um,
Real life issues,
real life
human
stuff.
issues.
Totally. And there's lots of diagnoses that could get some bins that I could get placed into, which I
Right.
fundamentally refuse to place myself in. I think that, the practical, like I said, those simple solutions, and I think I can overlook them as a counselor, but it's not always unpacking the childhood. It's like, okay, you're anxious and depressed because you spend 3 hours on your phone a day, you eat like crap, you sleep like crap, and your
Mm,
boss is a jerk. So you hate your job, you hate your food, you hate your family, and you think you can be happy in that environment. So the new age of counseling sometimes like, well, let's just meditate and picture a life that isn't yours. It's like, no, you need to do something.
you
You
need to
need
deal with what is.
you need to change something, right? And
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of like um, getting the whole picture with people, because I think sometimes it can get overlooked. Just some of the really obvious stuff like sleep and
The
relationships and the
basics.
basics. So
The basics. When you look back on your experiences with counseling, give me a best and a worst story.
oh my goodness, that's a good one. Oh man, that's a really good question. So like I've been so lucky, but I'm also a very agreeable person and I'm high in like uh like openness. So I'm really open. So like I'm generally like, oh cool, right on. I want to do this.
What's your Enneagram number? Do you know?
Oh
You ever
me.
do that?
So yeah, Enneagrams. So I'm a seven. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm a seven
Yes.
with a
Adventurer,
totally. Yeah.
epicure.
Yeah,
Hmm.
totally. But what's baffling is that I'm pretty, for a seven, I'm pretty aware of my emotions, just scared like hell to share them with people in a real way. So
Hmm.
to get candid and get real with my emotions isn't, it's been a learned thing for me. It's not in my
Hmm.
temperament. So I talk openly about my emotions, but it's like the most uncomfortable thing for me.
Mm.
Um, so a lot of counseling for me was learning how to like recognize like feelings, negative feelings, and be like,
Mm.
oh crap, like it's easy for me to be like, yeah, this is super positive, this is awesome, we're
Right.
gonna do this
Or
stuff.
like every good seven. Yes, I might have got run over by a truck, but it was a learning experience. It was a full
Exactly,
circle
like
moment for me, and it
yeah,
was beautiful in the end. So, like,
totally,
just saying, yeah, it did suck when I got hit by a truck was
totally,
okay. So,
yeah.
best story, best memory of a counseling moment for you.
I guess like the breakthroughs when I was in treatment and I was
Mhm.
22 and like I just like man, I was raw and I was like ready. I quit smoking. I started
Wow.
spiritually connecting and I spent I think it was about yeah, like a total of 5 months seeing the same people. So that I was lucky because I didn't just have
Mm.
one counselor. I had like I think maybe that's part of cleaning up in your early 20s. I had like all this sea of people that seemed like they really wanted to help me. And I think we're given
Oh,
a bit more grace when we're young. I
ah,
really believe that. I think
and
it's
maybe
like
a bit more help.
I
Did you
think
feel
so.
like?
Like
Yeah.
I had some man, I'm lucky. Like when you say that, I'm like I had uh, indigenous elder that I was working with who was an amazing man. I
Hmm.
had a counselor who I saw to be like, nope, we're going to look at your childhood and your inner critic and your shadows, and like,
Yeah.
we're going to dig into you. And that introduced me to another mentor that I still speak to who
Mm.
hasn't been through addiction, but continues to answer the phone when I call him and say, like, what's going on 2, 3
Mm.
times a year. So I built a real community of hardcore healers because I needed more than
Cool.
an hour a week.
Yes.
Now, for the counseling that
Don't we all?
right, like
Yeah.
I needed more. So
Right.
but yeah, so my best experience would have been with the people who were willing to call me out and willing to say, hey, this only works if you're honest. Um, called me out on my shit,
Yeah.
but in a way that was comfortable, and there was a degree of themselves that they were willing to share with me to make sure it was
Ooh,
safe.
right.
Because if you're not going to share nothing,
Fuck.
zip it, fuck off.
Yes. Like I sometimes find that universities who are pumping out the counselors these days
Yeah, they're
are,
pumping them out.
I find that the counselors are so afraid to use self-disclosure. Like it's some kind of failure of their.
Oh
But
yeah,
it is such a gift that you give your clients of safety and relatability and vulnerability when you're with a counselor who does it properly, isn't doing it to feed their own ego or to use your time for their issues, but just is willing to say, listen, I've been there. Here's something I did when I was wasted and driving drunk, or whatever it is that they say. It,
totally.
it goes so far to creating a safe space.
It does. Well, and I get that too because the oversharing piece is real, right? And I had an experience with that in counseling where it was like, whoa, like I haven't built enough rapport with you to like know everything about your life. And there's actually
Oh,
I listened to a podcast not long ago where they talk about like how long, and Buddy had a rule or something. He was a psychotherapist slash psychiatrist. I listen to all the time. But he says like there's like a cap on how much time I'm willing to spend talking about myself in a session. I have to like set it in my head of like, okay, like I'm going a little too far, but I think what we're talking about is
Mm.
like you kind of have like these little parameters of like what's appropriate, not appropriate, and it's not firm. Like it's hard. It's hard to find where
Yeah,
that balancing point is. Um,
right.
but oversharing's real and undersharing's real too. So like if I'm just like
Yes,
I'm not going to share anything with you, then it becomes fabricated. And if you share too much, then it's like who's counseling who here, man? Like,
right.
but one
And
once,
yet, I will say my most recent experience in therapy, and I've been in and out of therapy since for 25 years, really. Like I've been to so many different types and people and my most recent person who has helped me a lot shares absolutely nothing about herself. And it took me a long time to get used to because I was used to people that shared a bit. And I've been pleasantly surprised at how much space has been created just for that to be my time. And I surprised myself because I really do believe in showing up as a whole person for clients and sharing a bit about myself and having genuine relationship and but she's literally a psychoanalyst and she doesn't do that.
right?
But you can never say anything is absolute, really. I'm saying that about myself. Yeah. There's
No,
exceptions to every rule, isn't there?
100%. And I think that's what's so kind of cool about counseling in general is you learn so much about yourself. You learn so much about other people.
Totally.
And, I think it's just so humbling because it is like, even when you say that, what was making a counselor good or what was it bad or good or this, or it's like, how much of that is where I was at the time? How much of that is like how
Right.
much I was willing to share what I need, what I needed when I was first really raw and hurt and was I needed a space to feel 100% safe. And then as I
Yeah.
got further along,
100%.
I had to have somebody to kind of grind up against some of my ideas and stuff more
Mhm.
to challenge me. But
Yeah,
yeah,
we need
that's
different things at different times. And even some of the worst experiences I've had in therapy as a client, I remember them. I remember them so vividly. One of them is this. I got to tell you this story. So I started seeing someone that was provided through my EFAP through my work benefits,
right.
where they assign you like so and so, Billy, we'll call him, is going to call you at this time. So he calls. I have no idea where in the world Billy is, but he's not around here. And told him I kind of trauma dumped on him for the first 5 minutes. Like, I've been sexually abused my entire childhood. Like, here's all my shit. And I'm struggling and I don't know what to do. And then he goes like this. I shit you not. He goes like this. He had a French accent. Jennifer, it's time for you to live. You have to live.
Right
Live.
on.
And I'm like, what the hell? Like, are you going to ask me any questions about? And he just kept saying that. And I got off the phone and thought, I am never seeing that guy again. But it fucking stuck with me
Yeah.
so much. And it doesn't mean I never went back. I went back to therapy, obviously, but there was something about that experience. And then a friend of mine, we were laughing about it. She got me a wooden kind of block sign that says live that I still have in my
Nice.
in my kitchen
Live,
window.
man.
So, what is bad and what is good.
You're totally and I think that's where I'm always like I'm always resistant to like, ever, bash another counselor or anything like that and say this or that or the other thing. There's certain things that are unacceptable and certain things that are set in stone. But like for the most part, I think if somebody came into this profession with anything other than like an actual deep curiosity for people, so who becomes
Yeah.
counselors? People who are interested in people less than things,
Yeah.
high, interested maybe in ideas and people at the same time. So like there's a certain
Mhm.
type of person, but it's interesting you say that because it's yeah, when it's a long and hopefully it's a long-term relationship because the long-term relationships I've had counseling wise are the ones that really start to get into the meat and potatoes of understanding who I am, and
Right.
I think that's that humanistic approach, like kind of maybe got overused a little bit too, though, is like, oh, just show up and be human and genuine curiosity. Um, but I still, I think this is what I think using all those tools as they come is super important. Like, because sometimes there is teaching pieces. Like some people I know like have a really hard time with emotions or like getting into their trauma or anything like that. They just won't, and it's not my job to
Yeah.
pry it out of them or anything like that. It's never been my job. Um, Sometimes you just spend a lot of time with building rapport and applying really practical tools for what's going on for them.
Yeah.
It's such an interesting journey because it's never gonna quite get it right. It's kind of like music, I guess. You're kind of
Right.
always grinding out those skills and polishing that rock. And um, yeah, I'm
So
always
true.
curious. Like, do you ever find like, because when they talk about the transference piece with people, like, what is your experience with transference been where somebody's going through something and you're like, oh, I like feel that and I need to look at that. Um, or like, I haven't looked at that yet. And now that I hear
Mm.
this person walking through that pain, it's like, do I do that? Yeah, I do that.
God, you're asking me. Here's my, well, I've said this before, but feels cringy to admit to it. I had for many, many years as a counselor a reaction to people who were depressed. I knew they were depressed because I would have trouble staying awake.
Oh
Like,
my
I
God.
shit you not, as soon as they were in the room, I literally had to pinch myself. I didn't enjoy it. I couldn't get, the energy used to just engulf me. And
No
I,
doubt.
and I was like falling asleep in the session, trying
I'm
not
su-
to.
I'm surprised you're not falling asleep right now. I'm a pretty depressed person, man.
So this is what I discovered. Once I, because I, there's concepts in psychology and some of them are really easy for me to grasp and some of them are not. And transference was one that was not that easy for me to grasp. Counter transference.
Yeah, yeah,
I just was trying to wrap my head around it and I couldn't. But anyway, then I was in my own therapy and I actually realized how out of touch with sadness I have been in my life with my own story. Like I can get angry about it, I can get shameful about it, I can but sad was really hard for me. And I decided a few years ago to take a leave from work and just really let myself crash and burn, like have a good old fashioned
cry.
nervous breakdown
Whew.
and get really depressed. And once I did that and had the experience of my therapist being with me through the whole thing, I have never had the same feeling with depressed people since.
Yeah, totally. And that's been my experience too. And you know what, the wise mentors that I and supervisors and people I've had to get me where I am right now was like same answer. When I ask people, what do I got to do to be a good counselor and like
Work your
longevity?
own shit. Work your own shit.
Not
Is that what they
optional.
say?
Yeah,
Not
work your own shit.
optional.
Not
Yeah.
optional. And if somebody's shit gets stuck to you, get it off you right away.
And it's
And
because of your stuff. It's not because of your
no,
clients. So
it's not
it
their
was
shit.
never those poor clients that, I mean, I still did the best I could by them. And I don't believe that they knew that I was having this internal experience of I can't stay awake here. But
Nobody could fake it better than a counselor, I
oh
guess,
my
right?
God. But I felt so bad and I didn't understand it. And, it was undigested emotions and undigested material of mine.
Yeah, yeah.
That
Well,
that's where it comes from for me.
it's huge and it's hard. Yeah, I need a lot of help to get that stuff, work through that stuff now. The
Hmm.
spiritual work is ongoing. And, if I were to go see a counselor, some of the first questions that I would ask them is sort of like, what do you take part in? What type of healing do you do yourself?
Right.
Because there is, unfortunately, as much as I say I won't talk poorly about any counselors, I know, if you're a counselor and you're an addictions counselor and you're actively drinking and drugging, like I got a big problem with that because the
Yeah.
the the treatment for the individual suffering from addiction is uh, often abstinence from drugs and alcohol. So if you don't have that in order in your own life, I guess the moral behind it is take care of put your own house in perfect order before you start trying to organize the community or
Right.
the
Or at
person in front of you.
least, if not perfect, because we never get there, do we? But at
Totally.
least an effort that you exert all the time. as a
Totally.
like, if you're showing up to help somebody else and you've never traveled any road that really messed with you, then I can't work with you. Like, I can't be your client because I need to know you know that level of vulnerability when you put yourself in someone's hands and say, "Help me."
Totally. And that's exactly it. And I think it's so important to understand that before a person, because I don't know if you're experienced with that. I've met people who've gone, spent about 6 years in school and
Never been a client.
they've never been a client and they've never been vulnerable and they're uncomfortable around people crying. Like I was lucky to be introduced to like levels of abuse and trauma and concurrent disorders early on in my career that I was okay. Like before I even went to school, I was like, yeah, I want to do this. This is my vocation.
Yeah.
This is my life. Like I want to walk in a way, both professionally, spiritually, socially, academically, that involves helping people who are struggling deeply with really deep issues. Um,
Yeah.
and sure, every once in a while you get some clients that are a little bit easier and some that are a little more difficult and have a more because the deep seated trauma can take more energy out of me if I'm being honest, like the complex
Mhm.
personality disorders stuff and
Mhm.
chronic psychosis and things like that. They can take a lot off your plate, and
Right.
especially working in residential treatment centers where I was kind of
Right.
immersed in a lot of like concurrent pretty serious concurrent disorders and like um I have I think there's just like yeah there's like a learning in that but for me like holding space for somebody who's willing to talk about something that is disturbing like just the sexual abuse and especially stuff that happens to people as kids. I always find when they disclose that it's such a blessing and honor that they feel comfortable to do so, but I'd be a liar if I said there isn't all sorts of emotions that come up and more it's more draining when you have those days. And
Yeah.
I also hope to God and pray to God that I have more of those days because I know that the opportunity to disclose some of that stuff for people is so healing when it's in a safe
So,
space.
yeah. I mean, it's what struck me over the years being in this work is, like you said at the beginning, what people really need sometimes is so simple. They need to be heard and seen and validated.
Totally.
And
Well,
especially with stuff like childhood abuse and, like it doesn't have to be this big fancy intervention.
no,
Some
it
of the
doesn't.
some of the most powerful moments for me in counseling is when my own therapist would say, "Oh my God, that should never happen to you." And I was like, "Oh, really?" Like,
Right.
"Oh, okay, really? You think that something big I remember I used to say at the end of sessions for the first several years, "Do you think I might have been abused?" And they would be like, "Oh my God." Because I was so traumatized that I was detached from these pieces of me, right? That
Totally.
would come out as bits of stories. And I needed that counselor to react humanly to how horrible that was so that
To-
I could know it.
totally. Totally. And then you get to live in reality. You get to live in
Right,
a different reality and yeah, it's so
right.
it's pretty cool. Like, and I think that's the part that we have to I believe that I believe that people can overcome. I believe that people can do better. Um,
Yeah,
I think that's that holding out hope. Yeah, there's just so much evidence of people who've done better and had rough goes, really rough goes, and
yeah.
um, just thinking about all those people, it's like wow.
It's an amazing profession to be part of, isn't it? Like,
It's so cool.
it's like,
Honestly,
I can't believe I get paid to do this.
so
It's just
that's how I
amazing.
feel right now. And even just sitting and talking to you right now, I said it to my partner before coming in here. I was just like, I can't even really believe the things that have happened since I started on this path of recovery and since I started on the path of going to school and everything. And like it's um it's just magical. It's magic. It's
It is.
uh and the healing like continues. The stuff that hasn't been revealed yet, like I'm just so excited about where my future is heading. And I have to say that to people when I'm working with them. It's like I still, you know, I still picture myself as a mentally ill 16-year-old kid some days who's smoking pot and playing guitar and long hair and skipping class. And the that voice that I talked about earlier of the judge saying like, no, you shouldn't be doing this. And it's like, no, you can change whatever you're doing. You can't quite change your temperament or your personality. That's
Right.
intact, but yeah, you can really, do something different if you want to. And
Yeah.
it's simple steps to
Mhm.
manifest that. It can't be complicated. It has to be you're too complicated, so it needs to be a simple solution, right? That's what I love about
Right.
working with addiction, because it's like you come in, it's like got charges, the kids are getting taken away, you're
Right.
in debt, like everything is a disaster. The accumulation of problems is so huge that you're like,
Yeah.
there's no way. And then chipping away, looking at that shovel, piling this shit out of the way, and eventually the pile's smaller, and it's like, oh, I have a
That
manageable
was really
life.
doable. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Then we're complaining about being bored.
oh, I know. I'll probably do it like an hour from now. I'm like, oh, I want to do more conversations like that. I'm bored now. So, yeah.
So if people wanted to get in touch with you, where would they find you? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now.
Yeah, so I'm running an online practice right now. So just strictly online until I find a space. I'm in Edmonton.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, so people can find me on my website. They can find me you know uh yeah, they can find me through my website,
Which is
Palmer Stroud Counseling.ca,
awesome.
www.palmerstroudcounseling.ca. Um, Yeah, and then also all social media. I'm on all those for my counseling as well, just Palmer Stroud
Hmm.
Counseling. Yeah, and I mainly like right now, it's been super cool. Some of this stuff let's coming up, and people I've talked to, but mainly right now, a big portion of who I've been helping is people who are in recovery already and want, just some more tools
Hmm.
and go into some deeper places that maybe they feel they need to go to. And then there's people who are actively in relapses and struggling,
Yeah.
who need a safe space to without judgment to talk about what they're going through, and taking some steps to either try to get into treatment or start going into support groups or just figure out what they need.
What they need.
And
Yeah.
then a lot of family and loved ones right now, actually, that's who I've been spending a lot of
Mhm.
time talking to, is people with addiction might not clean up, but mom and dad and wife, husband, sisters, brothers, cousins can all get help and support.
Right.
Either through counseling and looking at their own crap, or getting pointed in the right direction of some support. So that's been a big one as well. Um,
That's awesome.
yeah, and then yeah, just sort of making lots of really cool connections with old friends and people the past bit. It's been a really cool experience. Like I
Mm.
just officially launched my private practice 3 weeks ago. So there's been a lot of really cool
Wow.
stuff happening, and like, yeah, the conversations have just been amazing. So I don't know what's coming down the pipe, but
But
so
it's
far
feeling good.
it feels right. Honestly, yeah, it feels very, very right. I watched a lot of people kind of later on in their career bust out into private practice. So I was like, I'm just gonna skip a few steps here
Just
and
start
just
that
start
way.
now. And
I love it.
yeah, so
And let's do a shout out to Melody Beattie,
ah,
who died
yes.
this week.
Did she really? Oh my
I just
goodness.
heard that as she died this week. And she was kind of, well, someone said when I heard it, they said she was sort of that mothership of people loving someone with an addiction, getting healthy themselves.
The Language of Letting Go, man.
Yeah.
Powerful, powerful book. And I think any family member who is watching someone struggle with addiction, or
Needs
codependent no more, was that the other
codependent
one?
no more. Oh, yeah, she was had a profound impact on so many people.
No,
What a
didn't.
legacy. Yeah.
Yeah, that's I didn't know that. That's I actually thought of her book this week. My dad brought it up when we were talking. Melody Beattie, Language of
Mhm.
Letting Go book. I think it was the one we were talking about.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's good stuff.
it's
Well,
really good
it's
stuff.
been a treat talking to you today. Thank you so much, Palmer, for being here.
All right, thanks a
See
lot,
you
Jennifer.
later.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.